Shalom everyone, and welcome to the study of Sefer Shemot together. Today, I would like to study Sefer Shemot and Parashat Shemot for maybe a different perspective. The first national antisemites, which I will try to learn with you together. A little bit about the motivation of Pharaoh and the Egyptians, in a way, till the recent times. The Torah describes Pharaoh in the following way: Vayakom melech chadash al Mitzrayim, asher lo yada et Yosef. A new king rose on Egypt. He did not know Yosef. He did not know Joseph. And obviously when you read this pasuk, when you read this verse, you cannot not ask yourself a very simple question. As we say in Hebrew, be'emet? How can you say that he didn't know Yosef? Yosef was the one who saved Egypt from famine. He created Egypt to be an empire. You would like to tell me that Yosef was not known in Egypt at all? Therefore, the Midrash, Tanchuma, which is around the 7th or 8th century, says immediately he recorded a machloket, a dispute between different commentators, and described to us a very interesting story about Pharaoh. Vayakom melech chadash al Mitzrayim. A new king arose on Egypt. Says the Midrash, Hu aya Paro arishon. It was the same Pharaoh, like the same Pharaoh that was with Joseph. Ela, so what's wrong? This Pharaoh appointed Joseph to be second in command. So what exactly happened here? Says the Midrash, Ela she'amru lo. Someone told the king. It might be his advisors. It might be his people. It might be his cabinet. It might be his government. We don't know. But someone told Pharaoh, Bov nizdaveg le'uma zu. Let's go ahead and really bother, annoy, put afflictions on this nation. Amar lahen, ad achshav היינו משלהן, ואנו מזדווגים להן? Says Pharaoh to those people, how can we do that? We were their best friends. We hosted them here. I, Pharaoh, invited Jacob and his family to come. And without Yosef, אילולא יוסף, לא היו לאותן האנשים ידיים ואתם מזדווגים להם? Says, without Joseph, we will not be here. This Joseph, this Hebrew, this person who came to Egypt, he saved us. How can we be not nice to him and to his family? לא שמע להם. So he refused to listen to them. מיד הורידו מכיסאו 3 חודשים. So the people of Egypt, or the advisors, the government, I don't know who, they basically removed Pharaoh from his throne for 3 months. A coup. כיוון שראה שהורידו, so when he realized that they are not bringing him back, אמר להם, כל מה שאתם אומרים, אני שומע לכם. Whatever you're going to tell me, I'll agree. You want to try to annihilate these people who are here, you want to bother them, you want to make their lives very hard, I'll listen to you. לפיכך, therefore, ויקום מלך חדש. When you look at this midrash, it is an amazing description of a political pressure on Pharaoh, on the inability of Pharaoh to stand up with a strong spine and say, don't touch them. They helped us build Egypt to an empire. We owe it to them. When he saw that his position is shaky, he said, I will do whatever you want. And this is the interpretation of Melech Chadash, a new king. It's not a new king. He made himself new. He made himself like he does not know Yosef and his promises to Yosef and to his family, which obviously brings us to the idea and to the understanding that here you have a king who does not have a spine, who does not think that he needs to be grateful to the person and to the people who helped him to be who he became. The Netziv of Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, in his commentary on the Parsha, in Aamek Davar, he says something very similar. He says, Vayakom Melech Hadash. What does it mean, a new king? Melech Acher Mibai. It should be a different king. An additional king. What does it mean, a new king? Ela Mashmaut Chadash Bedeot Chadashot. What does it mean, Chadash? Chadash is not new king that you bring him from the store. Deot Chadashot. New thinking, new concepts. שלא ידע להכיר את יוסף, אשר הרבה להיטיב עם המדינה, ואמונתו הרבה למלוכה, ומזה הגיע המלך לחושתם. This is an incredible insight into what I will call ancient antisemitism. You have a king who does not even bother to learn history. I'm not talking about Jewish history. I'm talking about his own general history. How did we become such an empire? How did we become such a wealthy country? He did not think that he needs to know Yosef. And if I don't know him, I don't need to be grateful for him. And I owe him nothing. I owe his family nothing. I owe his nation nothing. And therefore, when I don't owe you anything, and you sit and you dwell in my country, what do you do for me? What did you do for me yesterday? What are you about to do for me tomorrow? And Pharaoh is looking at the nation and he says to himself, they are useless. And he becomes suspicious. And he becomes suspicious and he says to himself, you know what? Maybe they want to basically take over Egypt. So this is where we stand according to the Netziv. Therefore, the following pasuk makes tremendous sense. After we describe this king, who he might be the same one, but because of political pressure, changed his mind and basically sided with the people who hate the nation of Yaakov, Am Israel, or alternatively, it might be a different king who didn't even bother to look at the history and to be grateful to the person who brought him to power. The following pasuk comes along. Vayomer el amo. Now, he speaks to the nation. Not that the nation speaks to him or the advisors. He takes an active role in bringing these afflictions on the Jewish people. But pay attention to the way he phrased it. Ine am bnei Israel rav ve'atzum mimenu. Here, the people of Israel, am bnei Israel, this nation of the children of Israel, they came here with just 70 people. They became fruitful and multiply, and they are more numerous than us. Is that true? Is that possible? It's hard to know because obviously we don't have the statistics and we don't have the numbers of how many Egyptians were there and how many Hebrews were there and how many other nations were there. But it seems to be that it's a bit hard to believe that the Jewish people became more numerous than the Egyptians. But that's the concept, that's the perception that Pharaoh is trying to convey. And then, interesting, וכאשר יענו אותו, so they start afflicting the Jewish people in order probably to create stress and to reduce the birth, but כאשר יענו אותו, כן ירבה וכן יפרוץ. The Jewish people would not deter from all these afflictions and trying to narrowing their steps. The Jewish people continue to flourish. And what's the result of it? ויקוצו מפני בני ישראל. What does it mean? Vayakutsu. So if we hold on for a second, obviously, when we see a word in the Torah that it's not that clear, we need to try to take a step back for a second, to digress, and to ask ourselves, what's the root of the word? That's A. And B, what can we find in other places in the Torah a word that is similar or identical to the word Vayakutsu? And that's exactly what the commentators did. So, the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, in Masechet Sotah, page 11a, says the following: Vayakutsu mipnei bnei Israel, the Egyptians kutsu mipnei bnei Israel. What does it mean? Says the Babylonian Talmud, melamed shehayu domin be'einehem kekotzim. What is a kotz? A throne. When you see a throne, you don't want to touch it. And even if you see something beautiful next to a throne, you're not going to touch it. The Egyptian people start looking at the Jewish people, at Am Bnei Israel, at the nation of Israel, like thorns, like something that you remove yourself from. You don't hang out with them. You don't bring them to your house. You don't collect them. You don't help them. There is what I will call dehumanization from people to thorns, to something that you want to basically pick up, cut, and throw it to the garbage. This is how the Egyptians start looking at Am Bnei Israel that they themselves invited to Egypt, and they owe them their tremendous success. That's according to the Babylonian Talmud in Sotah. The Rashbam, 11th century, in France, he says something else. He says Vayakutsu, 12th century, he says Vayakutsu bechayehem, meaning the Egyptians couldn't stand their own lives. Kmo katzti bechayai. What does it mean, kmo katzti bechayai? Like someone else says, katzti bechayai. Take a look at the verse. In Bereshit, in Perek Av Zayin, chapter 27, the Torah describes Rivka's feeling and the way she conveyed it to Yitzchak, to her husband. Vatomer Rivka el Yitzchak. Rivka says to Yitzchak, Katzti bechayai mipnei bnot chet. I have enough. I can't live even one day if lokeach Yaakov isha mibnot chet kaele mibnot haaretz lama li chaim. This is an amazing conversation. Rivka is basically putting an ultimatum to Yitzchak. She says to him, look, if you don't send my son Yaakov to find a different wife, and he takes a woman from the Hittite nation, this is my last day on earth. Katzti, I have enough. Die. If that's true, just listen to the severity of the verse. Vayakutsu mipnei bnei Israel. The Egyptian people feel, even though the king is Egyptian, the government is Egyptian, I would guess that many of the positions are being held by Egyptians. When they see a Hebrew, when they see someone that belonged to Yosef, to Yaakov, to his nation, to his family, they look at themselves and they say, we cannot stand even one day living here if they are here. The amount of animosity, the amount of hate, the amount of disgust, it's something that we need to maybe even take a minute and to think for a second. How can a person look at another human being and thinks like that? But that's katzti bechayai. Rav Yosef Prochor, another French commentator, said something very interesting. Vayakutsu mipnei bnei Israel. So the Egyptians, basically vayakutsu again, where he will give an interpretation to what does it mean vayakutsu. And he says the following. כי כאשר ראו, כי כן יוסיפו לענותם, כן יוסיפו לפרוט ולהרבות. קצה בחייהם מפני בני ישראל לבדם. בתחילה היו יראים פן התחברו עם השונא. עכשיו שראו אותם כל כך פרים ורבים, קצה מפניהם לבדם. This is an amazing and very insightful commentary. Basically, Rabbi Yosef Bchor says, at the beginning, the Egyptians looked at the Jews and they saw that they are multiplying, but they are numerous. They are a great nation, but they will not win us. They will not go in a battle against us. But the fear was maybe they will join another group and then they will take over Egypt. So that was the beginning. However, as the time went by and more affliction on the Jewish people basically achieved the opposite result and the Jewish people became even more numerous, the Egyptians start being suspicious that this nation will not join any other group or any other nation to overtake Egypt. They themselves will overtake Egypt. Those Jews who told Pharaoh, Lagur ba'aretz ban, we just came here to dwell because of the famine, and we have a land. We have the land of Israel. This is our land. We are not staying here. No. The Egyptians are convinced that the Jewish people are about to take their land. If that's true, just think about it. If you feel that the person who you hosted is going to take over your home, what kind of feelings you are going to develop? Hate? Self-defense? You would like to kill them? You would like to annihilate them in order to protect you, your family, and your nation. Rabbi Yosef Bchor basically is describing an impossible reality for the Jewish people. And therefore, the Egyptians or the Torah used the word vayakutsu. Not only that they cannot stand them, now they need to do something in order to remove that threat from Egypt. That's Rav Yosef Bchor. Now, there is something that we definitely need to see, is that we also know that before Yosef passed away, he told his brothers, Pakod yifkod Elokim etchem. God is surely going to redeem you. Ve'alitem et atzmotai mizeh. And you will take my bones with you to the land of Israel. I brought this pasuk to show that if this Egyptian king and if this Egyptian people will just read history, or maybe we'll just have a conversation with these people that they hate so much and ask them, what's your plan? Are you planning to stay here? Would you like to go away? What's the plan? They will know that the Jewish people are not planning to stay in Egypt. Egypt was a good place for the Jews, but they have a land. They have their promised land. And Yosef, who built Egypt, he himself said, I don't want to be buried here. I would like you to take my bones to the land of Israel. I'm not staying here. You're not staying here. So the Egyptians, you don't need to be afraid. But the problem is that when someone is so fearful, and when someone is so paranoid, and when someone starts hating people with no reason behind it, you can't talk logic into him. You can't talk to him logically. You can't convince him. Because if you have fears, it's an emotion. No one could convince the Egyptians that these people are not planning to stay. The Kli Yakar a commentator from around the 18th century, says the following: נראה לי שהמצרים נמשלו בעיני עצמן לקוצים. This is a very creative interpretation. He says, when the Egyptians ויקוצו מפני בני ישראל ויקוצו, the Egyptians themselves, they look at themselves as thorns, not the Jewish people, themselves. Why? כי מדרך העולם שעוקרים מן השדה הקוצים כדי לטעת במקומם נטייה משובחת. Because when you plow a field, the first thing that you do, you basically uproot the thorns in order to plow the field and to plant things there. רצה הקדוש ברוך הוא ליטע בארץ ישראל נטייה משובחת, ולכן עקר משם את האומות. And also the same thing in the land of Israel. Before the Jewish people came into the land of Israel, God helped them to annihilate the 7 Canaanite nations. Those are the thorns. So the Jewish people can plant themselves there as a נטיעה משובחת, as a fruitful tree. כך חשבו המצרים. That's the same way that the Egyptians thought that it will happen to them, which means, אחר שרצון האל יתברך, שעם ישראל פרו ורבו עד למעלה, ודאי רצון האל שיהיו ישראל נטועים בארץ מצרים, והמה יהיו כקוצים מושלכים מן הארץ זרי ala. This is very creative. Basically, the Egyptians, they look at a miracle. They look at the Jewish people and they said, we remember, they came down to Egypt with 70 people. Look at them. Now they are with hundreds and thousands of people. It means what? That really their promised land is Egypt. And this is why their God is making them such a great nation in numbers that they will basically take over Egypt. We are the thorns. He's going to what? To remove us from the land of Egypt and will plant the Jewish people where? In Egypt. And therefore, what do we need to do? We need to do whatever we can in our power to limit the rate of birth. So how do we do that? We're going to enslave them so they will have no time to be together, and we're going to throw their baby boys into the river. This is how we are going to limit and to restrict the birth rate. If you take the Kli Yakar, close to the 18th century, and you look at Rabbi Yosef Bchor Shor, you see that maybe they come from two different perspectives. But the anti-Semitic events, phenomena, reality was very much the same. Blaming the people of Israel with this conspiracy to take over a land that they have no desire to be there. Now I know during the desert, many Jews remembered Egypt favorably, but that's because they didn't see the land of Israel. After the Jewish people went to the land of Israel, there are only 2.5 tribes that says we're not going to go into the land of Israel, we're going to stay on the other side of the river, but they did not say we are going back to Egypt. Egypt, not only that it's not the promised land, we have a prohibition in the Torah that we shouldn't go back to Egypt. Therefore, what we see from all these mefarshim, from all those commentators, we see that Egypt, in a way, represents the first national anti-Semites who look at people and basically blame them with all kind of accusations with no basis, just because of their own fear of their success. If we continue on, and we will jump into the 19th century in Germany, Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. He says the following: מדיניות המיסוי החטיאה את מטרתה. Says the Egyptians start taxing the Jewish people, start collecting enormous amounts of taxation. And they thought that by doing so, the Jews will just be weak. But it didn't work. החטיאה את מטרתה. ככל שביקשו להתיש כוחם, כן ירבה, כן יפרוץ. עד שקצו. So more you try to restrict the Jews, they become stronger. So the Egyptians basically reached the point of what? Of katsu. It was enough. לא מפני היהודים, כדרך התבטאותם של שונאי ישראל. Meaning it's not they start discussing their own lives because of the Jews, no. אלא בכל קצו. גועל תוקפם בגלל נכוחותם המתמדת של היהודים. Meaning, Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, that's 19th century. He talks, in my opinion, from the surrounding, from the society he lives in Germany. He basically says they see the Jews and they can't stand them. They can't stand, and he will talk in a minute. If I, a German Jew, an Egyptian Jew, an Egyptian or a German, I go to a basketball game and I see a Jew, I have zero enjoyment from the basketball game because there is a Jew there. I can't enjoy anything in my life because I see that Jew. Which, by the way, is a really side note. There was another anti-Semite who felt the same thing. Haman, during Purim. Haman became the second in command. He had his wealth, he had his plan, he could do everything he wanted. But it says that the time that he saw Mordechai sits at the gate, he says, nothing. Kol ze einenu shoveli. I don't feel any enjoyment in my life when I see that Jew. So Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch continues on. כל הדברים שהיו רגילים ליהנות מהם, ובאלה היה להם מסתם היתרון גדול לעומת היהודים, פג ערכם בעיניהם, משום שהיהודים היו בכל. He says, even in things that were mainly for the Egyptian culture, or maybe even Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says, for the German culture. And maybe, and not maybe, says Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, I can assume that in a basketball game, you will have the majority of them will be Egyptians, not Jews. כך מבאר הילקוט שמונית הנאמר, ותמלא הארץ אותם, שנתמלאו בתי תרתיות ובתי קרקסאות מהם. ביקרו המצרים בתיאטרון, היו שם יהודים. נכנסו אל הקרקס, היו שם יהודים. רב שמשון רפאל הירש brings this wonderful midrash, ילקוט שמוני, who basically describes the stress, the paranoia of the Egyptian people. Think about it. I don't know, let's say Egypt has 25 million people. Let's say 12 million people are Jews. 13 million are Egyptians. You are the majority. And by the way, I don't think that that's the ratio. You are the majority. So, okay, there is in section A and in section B, there are some Jews who came to the basketball game. So what? No. I can't stand the fact that he's here. This is not hate. This is not animosity. This is a psychological disease. That you see someone that you didn't even speak to. You never really met. But you create those perceptions in your mind. You convince yourself that he is the threat and you need to annihilate him. This is the story of Egypt. According to Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, who may be hinting on Germany of the 19th century. The Netziv, in his commentary, Emek Davar, adds another component to this unexplainable anti-Semitism. And he says the following, ויקוצו מפני בני ישראל. עוד היו מקצה חייהם שראו החשובים שבהם, אנשים גדולי הערך, והיו נחשבים המצרים לנגדם כפחותי הערך וכקוצים. What does that mean? The Netziv suggested that the problem was the intellectual gap between the average Egyptian and the intellectual Hebrew, which means the average Egyptian looked at the Hebrews and he saw that they know how to read and how to write. They know how to speak in an eloquent way. He saw that they are pretty successful in business. They know math. They start getting Nobel Prizes. Obviously, the Netziv does not say it. I'm adding it. And then I look at them and I say to myself, how come that they are so smart? How come that they are so successful? And then instead of saying, wow, maybe I'll just go and ask them, maybe I can go to the same school, maybe I can learn together, maybe I can adopt some of those methods and I can teach my children, because I see that those families, they really care about their education and to educate their children. Instead, I start developing hate. And then I look at myself as an Egyptian and I say to myself, I'm worthless. I'm useless. I'm not as sophisticated, so I am a thorn. וגם זה להפך ממה שהיה בראשונה, ששמחו מצרים בחוכמת ישראל. Says the Netziv, and this is such an incredible depth. If you hold on for a second and go back to Tanakh, in Parashat Miketz, when Pharaoh appointed Yosef to be his second in command, the sentence that Pharaoh said on Yosef was the following: Ein navon v'chacham kamocha. There is no one smarter and wiser than you. Meaning, Yosef was appointed because of his wisdom, because of his ability not only to interpret a dream, but also to come up with a plan of what to do. And Pharaoh appreciated it. Pharaoh embraced it. The entire Egyptian people embraced it, and they called Yosef Avrech, Av bechokhma verach beshanim, meaning a father in wisdom and very young. Which basically means what? The Egyptians at the beginning appreciated, they embraced wisdom. They said, those Hebrews, they bring something to the table that we don't have, and you know what? It's wonderful. We are going to bring to the table whatever we have, they're going to bring to the table whatever they have, and together we built an empire. But now, instead of looking at partnership and appreciating what the Hebrews can bring to the table, the Egyptians want to neglect them, to ignore them, and even more than that, to hate them. And then, אבל כשרצה השם, היטה דעת מצרים לשנוא את ישראל, בשביל חוכמתם, והשתדלו להקטין דעתם על ידי דירת חוקה. So the Egyptians, instead of embracing the Hebrews and asking them to teach them also all this education, math and physics and whatever they knew back then, astrology, how to read, how to write, how to make calculations, instead, what do? Not that we're going to elevate ourselves, but we're going to do what? To decrease their level. Therefore, let's enslave them. Let's take all their time to do basically manual work that can be done in 1,000 different ways. But no, we are going to take those scholars and we're going to give them to do manual work so they will not be smarter than us. This is also such an incredible insight in anti-Semitism. Instead of saying, I would like also to maybe elevate my lifestyle, elevate my education, the idea is, no, let's put them down so they will be even less than us. Nechama Leibovich, in her commentary on Chumash, says the following: יש מרבותינו הרואים בגלות זו כבכל הגזרות המתרחשות עלינו עונש על חטא. והחטא הוא כאן הרצון להתבוללות. It says some of our rabbis, some of our sages, they look at the galut, or the exile, and they say it's probably a punishment on a sin. I just want to say one thing before we continue. The idea is, galut, afflictions, punishments. Some sages always will say, it's probably a punishment for a sin. And some people will say, you will never be able to understand. So don't ask the question of why. Ask the question of what. What can I do about it? But if we follow the opinion of those sages, that this galut, the Egyptian exile, was because of a punishment, was because of a sin. So what was the sin? What was the transgression? So Nechama suggested it was the ratzon להתבוללות. It was their desire to basically mix into the Egyptian society. בני יעקב אשר לגור בארץ באו, וכן הדגישו בפגישתם הראשונה עם פרעה, לא רק גרו, כי גם ישבו בה, וכבר בסוף פרשת ויגש הודגש ויאחזו בה. Meaning, Nechama Leibovich basically emphasized on the transformation in the plan. The plan was, we come here to dwell until the famine is gone. But already at the end of Vayigash, the Jewish people are holding on to the land of Egypt, Vayachzu ba, which is a very strong expression of holding on to something. ובזה חטאם, ועל זה בא העונש, ונהפכה ישיבתם ויחזותם שם לגלות ושעבוד. And that was their punishment. You think that this is your land? This is not your land. And I'll show you it's not your land, because the owners of this land, the Egyptians, will enslave you. אולם, יש מדרשים, אשר תפיסתם בטעם הסבל האיסורין, הגלות היא אחרת. לא עונש, כי אם חינוך. This is something very important. Many sages, they look at the galut not as a punishment, but as a lesson in education. על פי פסוקים רבים בתורה, אפשר אולי לשער שזהו טעם גלות מצרים בראשית היווצרות האומה. וזה טעם שבטם בבית עבדים, וטעם גזירת עינוי לפני מתן תורה ולפני בואם לארץ היוד, שירגישו הם בבשרם מהי עבדות, מהי השפלה, מהו היות נתון לחמאס, לגזל ולשלטון האדם באדם לרע לו. In order to be an עם סגולה, in order to be this treasured nation, in order to be able to receive the Torah and to go into the land of Israel and to build a nation, these people needs to go through a terrible time, affliction, humiliation, degradation. Why? So they will know for sure how it feels. So when they are in power, they will not do it to others. This is when you take a step back from it. There are so many questions that we can ask and discuss this Nechama Leibovich's commentary. But basically, if we just look at the idea itself, Egypt was everything that we should not do. In Egypt, you don't love the convert. When you are in Israel, ve'ahavtem et hager, and you love the convert. In Egypt, if you are a foreigner, you are a slave. In Israel, if you are a foreigner, you accept upon yourself the 7 laws of Noach, you are part of the land of Israel. In Egypt, if you are wealthy, you are going to use your power and you're not going to give gifts to the poor. In Israel, you have land, you give gifts to the poor. וכשם שגלות מצרים היא אב טיפוס לכל גולה שגלו ישראל, וכשם שעבדות מצרים משמשת נימוק ודחף למצוות, he says in the same way that Mitzrayim, the exile in Mitzrayim was basically the prototype for every other exile. And the same way that the enslavement in Egypt became the reason for many of the mitzvot, Shabbat, Zecher ליציאת מצרים, and מעשה בראשית, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Tzitzit, Tefillin, hundreds of mitzvot are Zecher ליציאת מצרים, that we shall remember what we went through. כך נהפכה גם הגאולה ממצרים דחף למצווה. החובה המוטלת על אדם מישראל לגאול את רעהו, שנמכר לעבד מעבדותו, מנומקת בתורה בהוצאת ישראל מארץ מצרים. This is an incredible thing. The גאולה, the redemption for Mitzrayim, was an incredible message, an educational lesson for us. No one should basically be a master over another human being. And if you see your friend who is about to fall, hold him, pick him up, pick her up. Don't let them fall. Let them stand on their feet, help them. This is the idea of Yetziat Mitzrayim. And take a look. If I take this Nechama Leibovitch and I relate her commentary to all the other commentaries that we saw before, you see something incredible. If anti-Semitism looked at the Jewish people as people who only take care of themselves and they try to elevate themselves to success and we are like thorns, the Geula is, hey, the Jewish people, look inside yourself. Build a moral and ethical society. And maybe, the other nations will see what kind of an Am Sgula you are. And those who don't, you will never be able to convince them. And now, to conclude the shiur, I will just quote this pasuk. Hashem said, "Va'ered le'atzilo miyad Mitzrayim." I will go down to Mitzrayim, so to speak, and I will save the Jewish people from the hands of the Egyptians. Ule'aloto min haaretz ha'ih, and I will elevate him. I will take him out. It's not only to take him out. To take someone out is lehotzi in Hebrew. Here it says le'aloto, from the word ma'ala, to elevate, ma'alit, an elevator, to bring him up, min haaretz ha'ih, from that land to where? El eretz tova urechava, to a wonderful, good land, a land that can expand. El eretz zavat chalav udvash, to the land of milk and honey. El mekom haknaani, hachiti, haemori, haprizi, hachivi, hayevusi. Hashem says to the Jewish people, your place, your true place, that the place that you will be able to elevate yourself, to maximize your potential as individuals, as families, as communities, and as a nation. It's right here, in the land of Israel. I don't know if there was a possibility, or if there is a possibility, to win anti-Semitism. But there is something that we can do. We can flourish here. We can build the best nation ever. A nation that knows how to protect its citizens, who knows how to protect even the foreigners, who know how to establish a society that is based on tzedakah, on justice, on chesed, on kindness, on love, on prosperity, on wisdom, on Torah, on friendships. This is the message of Exodus. Focus on yourself. Build yourself, elevate yourself, and then hopefully you will also fulfill our second task, Or Lagoim, to be a light unto the nations. Thank you.